In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars. They chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. The air in Sparrow Ridge was thick with the scent of lilac and broken promises. The kind of town you stumbled upon, not because you meant to, but because the road had nothing else left to offer. Dust hung like breath on a dying man's lips, and windows blinked with the dull resignation of places that had forgotten how to. Hope. Lena Marrow stepped off the stagecoach with a single valise, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing the uncertainty in her eyes. She had the look of a woman who'd wrestled with fate and learned to shake its hand only because fighting had cost too much already. She stood tall despite her modest frame, dressed in a faded blue traveling dress and scuffed leather boots that had seen far more road than the average mail-order bride ever should have. Mail-order wife. She hated the phrase. It clung to her like a chain, reducing every choice she'd made into a transaction. But this wasn't about desperation. This was about reinvention. Lena Marrow hadn't come to Sparrow Ridge to find love. She came to bury a name, escape a past, and maybe, just maybe, shape a future with her own two hands. The station master tipped his hat at her. "You Miss Marrow?" "I am," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. "Your husband's late," he said. "Or not coming. One or the other." She nodded once. Wouldn't be the first time a man promised more than he delivered. He chuckled at that, but she didn't smile. She waited on the bench outside the station for nearly an hour, surrounded by the creak of leather saddles and the muffled complaints of livestock being led to pasture. She listened, watched, took stock. Sparrow Ridge had a single saloon, a post office, a general store, and a church so warped by wind and time it leaned like it had grown tired of trying to save anyone. Children ran barefoot, women moved in twos and threes with baskets on their hips, and men watched her like she was a question they didn't know how to ask. And then he came. They said he didn't speak. Not once since he arrived 3 years prior. Walked into town one day, dragging a broken cart behind him. Bought a run-down house near the edge of town with the last of his coins, and spent the following months repairing it with a kind of fury that made people whisper. He was tall, with the lean, weather-hardened look of someone carved more by life than time. Wore a wide hat that shadowed most of his face, a long coat even when the sun burned hot, and gloves that never left his hands. Some said he was mute. Others said he was hiding. His name was Elijah Vance, and he had sent for a wife. He approached silently, boots crunching the gravel like slow thunder. He stopped 2 paces from her, eyes meeting hers beneath the brim of his hat. She stood. "Elijah Vance?" she asked. He nodded once. "I'm Lena," she said. "Lena Marrow." He didn't offer his hand. Didn't speak. Just turned and began to walk. She didn't hesitate. She picked up her valise and followed. They walked in silence down a dirt road lined with wind-warped fences. The house came into view like something risen from dust and stubbornness. 2 stories, weather-worn, but solid. Someone had rebuilt this place with a care that bordered on reverence. Inside, it was simple, clean. The air smelled of cedar and solitude. He gestured to the kitchen table and then disappeared upstairs. When he returned, he held a folded piece of paper. He slid it across to her. She unfolded it and read, "I do not speak. Not because I cannot, but because I choose not to. My silence is not punishment. It is preservation. You do not need to understand it. Only respect it." Below that, a second line. "There's a spare room if you prefer. The choice is yours." She read the note twice, then folded it neatly and looked up at him. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once and turned away. She moved her things into the smaller upstairs room. It had a window that faced the east, and when morning came, it painted her walls with gold. She unpacked slowly, deliberately, laying each item in place like she was claiming the space not just as a guest but as something more. Elijah Vance did not speak. But he watched. He watched how she measured flour with her fingers instead of a cup. How she folded her sleeves before kneading. Bread. How she sat on the porch in the evenings with a journal on her lap. Though she rarely wrote in it, she in turn watched him work. He rose before dawn and vanished into the barn, returned with sawdust in his hair and splinters in his gloves. Built. Furniture. Fixed fencing. Repaired tools. His hands never stopped. They existed in a quiet dance, two lives running parallel. No words. Just glances, nods, silence until the night the fire came. End of part 1. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. That night, the wind changed. It howled across Sparrow Ridge like it remembered something the town had tried hard to forget. Dust lifted in angry spirals, hurling bits of dry brush against wooden slats and rattling shutters that hadn't groaned in months. Lena stood at the kitchen window, her reflection blurred by the trembling pane, watching the horizon shimmer with heat even as twilight drew its veil across the land. Elijah Vance was in the barn. As always, there was something different about the wind tonight. It didn't merely blow, it whispered. Secrets, threats, reminders. Lena pressed her fingertips to the glass and squinted. In the distance, a flicker, orange, brief, gone. Like a match struck and discarded. Then another closer. She didn't hesitate, grabbed her shawl, bolted out the door. The barn was warm with the scent of horses and old wood. Elijah was hunched over, a broken yoke, tightening the final bolt into place. He didn't look up. Elijah, she said, breathless. There's a fire. His hands paused. Down near the ridge, she added. I saw it. Flickering. He stood in a single motion. No wasted effort. Just rise and go. She followed him outside, the wind pressing her dress to her legs. They climbed the knoll behind the barn, a small crest that offered an unbroken view of the valley floor, and there it was. Flames, real now, bright, angry, crawling across the earth with terrifying purpose. Elijah reached for the whistle around his neck, one she had assumed was decorative. He blew 3 sharp notes into the wind. The sound carried, echoed. Within minutes, figures appeared on horseback, riding hard, neighbors, farmhands, men from town. Silent but grim, nobody asked questions. Everyone saw the smoke. Elijah turned to Lena, his eyes locking on hers. He touched his fingers to the edge of her shawl and then gestured firmly back toward the house. She knew what he meant. No. Her feet didn't move. He stepped forward, taller than her by nearly a head, and for the first time since they'd met, his eyes flared not with warning, but with worry. He pointed again. Not a vase on a shelf, she said, her voice low but steady. Don't put me where you think I won't break. He didn't argue. Just turned and began issuing silent commands to the riders with gestures she barely understood. They took off in different directions, circling the blaze, trying to contain it before it reached the town. Lena didn't go back. She fetched buckets, rolled barrels, hauled water from the well until her arms screamed, helped the women soak linens, and press them into cracks beneath doors and windows. By dawn, the fire was out. Blackened earth clawed at the edges of town like a warning, scrawled by hell itself. She found Elijah slumped against a fence post, his shirt scorched and his gloves torn. His silence hadn't protected him from exhaustion. Sweat streaked his brow, and soot lined his throat like bruises. Lena knelt beside him and handed him the last of the canteen water. He drank. Not enough, but enough to know she was still there. Thank you for trusting me, she said. He didn't nod. Didn't blink. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his duster and handed her a folded note. I didn't, but I was wrong. Something in her chest shifted. A tightness loosening. She didn't ask him to explain. Just sat with him until the sun began to rise, red and bruised on the horizon. The two of them, side by side, listening to the wind that no longer screamed. That night changed things, not in grand declarations or sudden closeness, but in details. He began leaving tools out for her to find, little jobs. Fixing a gate hinge, mending a loose step. Shared labor, offered wordlessly. Her bread started appearing on the barn shelf. A plate of his favorite beans and cornbread would show up near the porch after his long evenings. One day, she found a rose. Just one, laid carefully on the kitchen table beside a clean water glass. No note, no explanation. She pressed it between the pages of her journal. Time moved, measured by chores and dinners, by the occasional letter from her sister in Carson City, and the silent strength of the man who never left her alone but never pressed too close. And then came the man in the khaki white hat. He arrived on a Monday, uninvited. He rode a black horse with eyes like coal and a gait too calm to be ordinary. His boots were polished, his duster new, and his smile was all bone and appetite. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted in front of the house. "Looking for someone?" Lena stood on the porch. "You found me, I hope so." "I'm looking for a Miss Lena Murrow." She didn't blink. "Who wants to know?" "Name's Jeb Carraway," he said, and his smile deepened like a knife going in. "And I've come to collect what's mine." The world tilted. Old Ghost stirred. Her grip on the railing tightened until her knuckles whitened. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Elijah stood there, silent as always, his gaze fixed on the stranger like he was memorizing the shape of a future threat. Jeb tipped his hat toward him. "Friend of yours?" Lena swallowed. "My husband. That so?" Jeb said slowly. "Funny, didn't see no ring." Elijah stepped forward. Jeb raised both hands in mock surrender. "Easy, friend. Just talking. You're not welcome here," Lena said. "That's a matter of opinion," Jeb replied. "You left without paying what you owed." Elijah's head tilted. Jeb caught it. "Did she not tell you?" he asked with false concern. "She was engaged once. To me. Broke the contract. Ran off with half my savings." It wasn't true. Not all of it. She had run, but not with his money. With her dignity. Jeb had been her father's business partner. A man who smiled too easily, touched too much, and listened too little. She'd fled the day he showed up with a marriage certificate she hadn't signed. "You need to leave," Lena said. "Now." "Not without what's mine," Jeb said. Stepping forward. Elijah moved then. Fast, quiet. One step. Two. He didn't touch Jeb, just got close enough that the other man flinched. The message was clear. Jeb turned, spat in the dirt, mounted his horse. "This ain't done," he said. Elijah watched him ride away. Never moved, never blinked. Inside, Lena shook. Elijah handed her a note. "Is it true?" She stared at the words for a long time, then wrote beneath them, "He hurt someone once. He would have hurt me. I ran before he could. That's all the truth that matters." He read it. Then folded the paper and burned it in the stove. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the day. But that night, she found her journal turned to the page where she had pressed the rose. And beside it, a new note. "Some things need to be buried. Others need to be planted." The next morning broke cool and colorless. Gray light filtered through thin clouds like breath through cotton, and the house creaked with the sound of waking timber. Lena stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the pale fire in the stove. Her hands, still stained from hauling water during the fire, held a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Elijah was already outside. She heard the rhythmic thunk of axe against wood, measured, deliberate. He split logs with the same stillness that defined his every move. Not aggressive, not angry, but like someone practicing an old ritual, as if the swing itself kept some long-buried demon at bay. Lena watched him from the window, her fingers tight around the ceramic cup, the fire, the dust. Jeb. She felt like the world was crowding closer, pushing in on the quiet they'd carved here like wolves circling the campfire. This place, this strange little rhythm she and Elijah had built, it had always felt fragile, like a song. Played too softly, easily drowned out. She stepped onto the porch. He paused mid-swing, glanced over his shoulder. "I want to do something," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "We can't just wait," she continued. "He's not done. Men like Jeb don't just disappear because they're told to leave." Elijah rested the axe into the chopping block and walked over to her. She stared up at him, jaw set. "We can't pretend the fire didn't happen, or that Jeb won't come back, or that this town is safe because it looks quiet. It's not, and I want to help. Really help." He studied her for a long time, then without a word, he turned and gestured for her to follow. They saddled the horses together. It wasn't spoken, but she understood they were heading into town. The ride was silent, but Lena's thoughts roared. They reached Sparrow Ridge mid-morning. The town looked like it was still shaking off the soot and fear. People were patching roofs, cleaning ash off steps, muttering under their breath. Lena dismounted and walked toward the post office while Elijah tied up the horses. She saw Mr. Voss, the preacher, speaking with two young men who wore scorched clothes and wild eyes. The sheriff, a man named Clay Drummond, stood on the corner with his hat low and his arms crossed, doing little more than observing. Like always, Lena marched up to him. "You planning to do anything about what happened last night?" Clay raised a slow brow. "Wasn't much we could do, Miss Merrow. Fire's out. Nobody died." "Nobody died this time," she snapped. "But Jeb Carraway's back, and he has a long memory." That made Clay blink. "Carraway? The timber baron from out near Deadwater Gulch?" "The same. What's he doing in Sparrow Ridge?" She lifted her chin. "Looking for me. He make threats?" "He didn't need to." Clay sighed and pulled out a small notebook. "I'll write it up. But unless he breaks a law, there ain't much I can do." Elijah appeared beside her then, silent as fog. The sheriff looked up at him. "You're her husband, ain't you?" Elijah nodded. "Then keep her close," Clay said. "Word is Carraway's done worse than threaten women other towns. But his money speaks louder than most folks' pain." Lena felt Elijah's fingers brush hers as they walked away. She didn't say thank you, didn't need to. Instead, they stopped by the general store, bought supplies, rope, lantern oil, ammunition, and something else. A small leather-bound book with no title. She turned it in her hands, uncertain. Elijah passed a note across the counter. "Write it down, all of it, so we don't forget." That night, they sat on the porch together. She with the book, he with a small knife, whittling shapes into cedar. She wrote, not just about Jeb or the fire, but about Elijah, about how silence wasn't the same as absence, how presence came in many forms. And then, days later, the letter came. The envelope was unmarked, hand-delivered by a stable boy who didn't know the sender. Lena opened it while Elijah stood by. One sheet, 2 lines. "You have 3 days to return what's mine. Or next time, I don't knock." Elijah took the note, read it, burned it. Then turned and left the room. Lena didn't ask where he was going, but she followed. He led her to the barn, to a corner she'd never seen disturbed. He moved a stack of crates, revealing a trunk, old, iron-bound. When he opened it, dust exploded like breath from a lung. Inside were things she didn't expect. Gun belt, a U.S. Marshal badge, and a bundle of letters, tied in red string. She reached for one, but he gently stopped her. Instead, he handed her another note. "I used to carry justice. Then I learned the system doesn't always want it. I lost my voice the day they told me the guilty would walk, and I still had to testify like they wouldn't." Lena's breath caught. "That's why you stopped speaking." He didn't nod, didn't move, just looked at her. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Not tightly, but like someone choosing to stay through the storm. And somewhere inside, the wind began to shift again, because the fire might return, and Jeb would, too. But this time, they wouldn't run. They would write it down. They would face it together. And maybe, in the process, silence would finally find its voice. Sparrow Ridge had known quiet before, the kind born of still mornings and gentle wind, but now the quiet carried weight. A tension. Like breath held too long, waiting for something to snap. Lena moved through it like someone who no longer believed in peace. It had been 2 days since the letter. 2 days since Elijah opened that trunk and handed her the truth without asking for forgiveness. 2 days since she realized she loved a man who had seen the world stripped bare and chosen silence over surrender. And now, it was the 3rd day, the deadline. She stood on the porch, hands gripping the rail as if it could hold her steady. The sun had barely crested the horizon, but the air already buzzed with anticipation. She saw it in the way the birds stayed hidden, in the way smoke rose from chimneys a little later than usual. Everyone was waiting. They just didn't know what for. Behind her, Elijah moved through the house with deliberate calm. No rush. Number. Panic. He placed wood in the stove, poured water into the kettle. Then he strapped the gun belt around his waist. He hadn't worn it since they met. He stood in the doorway now, watching her. Waiting. She turned. You think he'll come? He nodded. Double quotes. And if he doesn't come alone? He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. She stepped off the porch. Then I'm staying by your side. He walked to her and pulled something from his coat. A small, worn pouch. Inside it was a key and a second note. If things go wrong, ride to Cedar Hollow. Give this to the preacher there. His name is Arden Rowe. He owes me more than a favor. She shoved the key into her pocket. I'm not going anywhere. His eyes softened. But he didn't argue. They waited. The knock came at noon. Sharp, measured, like a man who had never asked for permission in his life. Jeb Carraway stood on the porch like he owned it. Behind him were 2 men she didn't recognize, one short and lean with a crooked nose, the other tall and blonde with the kind of eyes that never blinked. Elijah opened the door, but didn't step aside. There she is, Jeb said with a grin, tipping his hat toward Lena. Thought maybe you got cold feet again, darling. Lena didn't move. You had your warning. Elijah handed over a folded piece of paper. It was short, just 4 words, leave or be buried. Laughed. This is how you talk now? Through paper like some schoolboy with secrets? He crumpled the note and tossed it onto the porch. I'm here for what's mine. She's not yours. Elijah signed slowly. Jeb didn't understand it. Lena stepped forward. Then I'll say it. I left you because you lied. Because you made me feel small. Because you made a deal with my father and treated me like a debt. You think that means you own me? Jeb's jaw twitched. That ain't how it was. It is exactly how it was, she said. And now you're done. You gonna let her talk to me like that? He asked Elijah. Elijah stared at him. No wonder you don't speak, Jeb spat. Can't even control your own wife. That's when Elijah stepped down from the porch, the 2 men behind. Jeb shifted. Blonde eyes moved toward his holster. Crooked nose stayed still but smiled. If you want to fight, Lena said, just say so. Jeb turned to her. This is between men. Not anymore, she replied. And then she reached into her satchel and pulled out something no one expected. The badge, Elijah's old U.S. Marshal badge. She held it up. You know what this is? Jeb laughed again, but this time it faltered. Outdated. Meaningless. Wrong, she said. Elijah Vance never turned in his badge. Never submitted a resignation. Legally, he's still a marshal. She stepped closer. Which means, she continued, he can still arrest you for fraud. For harassment. For threatening an officer of the law. Crooked Nose took a step back. Blonde didn't move. But his jaw tightened. Scoffed. You're bluffing. Elijah pulled the badge from her hand and pinned it to his chest. Then he unholstered his gun. No words. No warning, just cold steel and a stare that promised hell. Blonde reached first. Bad decision. Elijah's first shot struck Blonde's wrist clean, sending the revolver flying into the dirt. The man cried out, cradling his arm. Crook nose turned to run. Lena fired a warning shot into the air. He froze. Jeb stood still. No weapon. No backup. Just fear. Elijah walked toward him. Jeb raised his hands. I get it. You win. Elijah stopped 2 feet from him, looked him over, then handed Lena the cuffs from his belt. She stepped forward. Turn around. You can't be serious, Jeb sneered. This ain't even your fight. She cuffed him. It is now. They rode to town with the 3 men tied behind their horses. The townsfolk didn't ask questions, but they watched. Watched as Lena walked into the sheriff's office and laid down a written statement. As Elijah stood beside her, silent but unmistakably present. Sheriff Drummond looked at the badge, then at Elijah, then back at the papers. If this is real, he said slowly, you might have just made things a whole lot safer around here. Lena nodded. That's the point. They left the office arm in arm. Not out of affection, but out of purpose. Sparrow Ridge wasn't safe, but it would be, because one woman decided to stop running, and one silent man remembered what it meant to stand. For the first time in years, the people of Sparrow Ridge gathered in the town square, not for prayer, not for mourning, and not for gossip, but for something unfamiliar purpose. Elijah Vance stood at the center, silent as always, with Lena by his side. Word of what they'd done had spread like fire through dry grass, and it lit up the nerves of every man, woman, and child who had ever wondered if quiet could stand for something. They didn't cheer, but they listened. Sheriff Clay Drummond had been reluctant, but even he couldn't ignore what was plain. Order had returned not because of law, but because of choice. Because 2 people had refused to be moved by fear. He stood with them now, hat in hand. I've spoken with the marshal's office in Carson City, he said. Badge is real, authority is still valid. Far as they're concerned, Elijah Vance never stopped being a marshal. Gasps and murmurs rippled. Lena saw the look on Elijah's face change, not pride, not satisfaction, but something deeper. A quiet reckoning. Drummond continued. That said, Mr. Vance's reinstatement is voluntary. He doesn't have to serve unless he chooses to, and there it was. A beat of silence. Elijah looked to Lena. She gave him nothing but calm. No push, no pull. Just eyes that asked only one thing. What do you want? He stepped forward and removed the badge from his chest. Held it up, then handed it to Drummond. Drummond blinked. You're refusing it? Elijah reached into his pocket, withdrew a folded sheet of paper, and passed it to the sheriff. The man read it slowly. Then read it again, and his face shifted. Respect. Then something closer to shame. He handed the note to Lena, and she read it aloud. Justice isn't about holding power. It's about protecting those without it. I'll wear the badge if I can be a shield, not a sword. But I won't serve a town that doesn't serve its people. Clean your house, Sheriff, then come find me. Whispers rose, not outrage. Agreement. Drummond nodded, slowly. That seems fair. And that was the end of the meeting. But not the end of what came after. Sparrow Ridge was not a large town, but it was built on old habits. And those habits didn't break just because a man wore a badge. They broke because someone reminded you. They could. So, when Elijah and Lena returned to their homestead that afternoon, it wasn't to peace. It was to a stranger on their porch. He wore no hat, had no visible gun, just a long coat and a face that bore more stories than skin. Lena instinctively reached for Elijah's hand. The stranger didn't move. Name's Arden Rowe, he said. I'm the preacher from Cedar Hollow. Elijah stepped forward. Rowe smiled faintly. Still don't talk, huh? Thought that might change someday. He looked to Lena. You must be the one who broke him open. If he's broken, she replied, it wasn't me who did it. Ro chuckled. Then his voice dropped. You should know Jeb Caraway's reach goes deeper than you think. He doesn't move alone. He moves through people, bankers, judges, old debts. And you? Lena asked. He tried, Ro said, eyes flaring, but I owed Elijah. And some debts get paid in loyalty. He reached into his coat and produced a leather-bound ledger. Everything I know, deals, bribes, connections, names, it's all here. He handed it to Elijah. You want justice? This is where it starts. Not with bullets, with proof. Elijah took the book. Lena saw his hand tremble. And in that moment, she understood. What was really in the air? Not revenge. Not wrath. Hope. Ro tipped his head. Don't waste it. Then he walked back to his horse and vanished into the wind. They took the ledger inside. Spread it open on the kitchen table. Names spilled out. Places, dates, transactions that spelled corruption. Like a slow poison. It was overwhelming. But Elijah didn't falter. Instead, he began writing. Letters, lists, a map of rot. And Lena helped. With ink on her hands and fire in her chest, she cataloged each betrayal. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. A week later, 2 deputies arrived from Carson City. They came not with orders but with questions. Sheriff Drummond had sent word. The badge might be real, but if Sparrow Ridge wanted to clean house, they had to do it together. Lena and Elijah handed over the ledger. The younger deputy flipped through it, whistling low. This is enough to fry half the territory. Then start cooking, Lena said. They left with the promise of returning. With law, with backup. And Sparrow Ridge waited again. But this time, not in fear. Elijah began training some of the townsfolk. Not to fight, but to hold a line. How to stand watch. How to read signs in the dust. How to stay calm when a man with a gun walks too close. He never spoke a word, but they followed him, because presence speaks louder than words ever could. Lena kept writing, not just for justice, but for memory. She wrote down every face, every shift in the wind, every time Elijah smiled, because she knew the next storm would come. But now they had a roof. And this time, it wasn't going anywhere. The wind carried new voices. Sparrow Ridge, once brittle and breathless, now stirred with life born not of comfort, but of defiance. The townsfolk were changing, slowly, unevenly, like soil long parched that hadn't yet learned how to take the rain. Elijah watched it from the porch every morning, the rim of his coffee cup cooling in his hand. He didn't speak. He never did. But Lena could read him now, down to the muscle behind his jaw, the angle of his brow. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was a map she'd learned to navigate. She brought him a letter that day. From Carson City. He opened it slowly, folding each crease with deliberate fingers. His eyes scanned the page. Then again. Then once more. Lena leaned in. Bad? He passed her the page. Deputy Marshal Darren Crane was coming. Not just to oversee the arrests that the ledger had made possible, but to inspect Elijah Vance himself. To see whether he could be trusted to wear the badge again. Officially, permanently. She looked up at him. Is that what you want? He didn't answer. But he didn't turn away either. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. And her mind too loud. Thoughts coiled in her like snakes in summer grass. This town, this man, this fight, they were all real now. Not just her escape plan, not just her rebellion. Her home. She rose before dawn and went outside. Elijah was already sitting on the steps. She sat beside him, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. You could be the kind of lawman who makes them better, not just afraid. His breath fogged in the cool air. He handed her a note he'd written on the back of an old tobacco label. Fear keeps peace for a while, but it never plants roots. They sat together until the horizon split with sun. When Crane arrived, he didn't look like a lawman. He looked like a banker who'd shot a few people. Clean boots, pressed vest, a badge that caught the light like it was supposed to blind. He shook Elijah's hand. Held it too long. You're the one who went dark. Word was you. Vanished. People assumed you were dead. Elijah didn't respond. Crane turned to Lena. And you, wife? More than that, she said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He toured the property. Inspected the barn, the fences, the tools. Asked questions designed to poke holes. You carry a gun again. Why now? Elijah scribbled a note. Because I finally have something worth protecting again. Crane narrowed his eyes. Then they rode into town together. Crane made notes, asked questions, measured the town's pulse like a man counting coins. When he left, he offered Elijah his hand once more. You're different, he said. But maybe that's what the badge needs. Elijah didn't take the badge that day. He held it, but he waited. That night, Lena found him in the barn. He was fixing the latch on the back gate. But she knew it wasn't about the gate. She brought him a lantern and sat beside him on a barrel. Why not take it? He passed her a note. I've carried the law before, and it broke me. Maybe it needs to be earned back. Not by papers, but by people. She smiled. Then earn it. But don't do it alone. He touched her hand. No words, but everything. Week passed, then another. The arrests began, one by one. Names from the ledger were pulled from beds, from banks, from brothels and train cars and law offices. The system Jeb had built trembled. And the more it shook, the louder his name became. Someone was protecting him, or hiding him. Elijah and Lena rode to Cedar Hollow, following a whisper from the stable boy who delivered the first letter. There, in a livery behind the church, they found a man who wouldn't give his name, but he gave them something else. A folded paper, inked with a name neither of them had heard. Martin Belgrave, the man behind Jeb, the man with the ledger's last page. He was no outlaw. He was a judge. Elijah didn't wait. They returned to Sparrow Ridge and prepared. Told Drummond, told Crane. Then they wrote the town's first public letter. Posted it in the square. Justice isn't a mask for power. Justice is a light for the dark. If the law forgets that, we remind it. Together, they signed it. E. Vance and L. Vance. Lena had never used his name before. She did now, because it was hers. 2. That night, for the first time, Elijah picked up a pen and wrote in her journal 6 words. The silence broke before I did. He smiled as he handed it back, and she, for the first time in her life, felt what it meant to be truly seen. Morning light crawled over Sparrow Ridge, golden and slow, as if reluctant to interrupt the quiet rebuilding of a town that had nearly forgotten how to hold itself upright. But even in its hush, the town felt different, now not simply soothed, not quite safe, but braced. Like it had finally decided that being small didn't mean being soft. Elijah Vance stood in the middle of Main Street, sleeves rolled, the new tin badge pinned to his chest. Not because Carson City had insisted. Not because Deputy Marshal Crane had returned with reinforcements and recognition. But because the town had asked him to. He hadn't taken it when they offered in official capacity. But when the townspeople gathered in silence outside his gate, hats in hand, and placed the badge on his porch without a word, that kind of asking couldn't be refused. Now he stood beside Sheriff Drummond, who no longer leaned out of things with slouching indifference. He stood taller these days. Less out of duty, more out of shame turned into resolve. You sure about today? Drummond asked, side-eyeing Elijah as he tightened the saddle on his gelding. Elijah didn't answer, didn't need to. Lena stepped from the general store, her hands ink-stained and sure, her hair tied up in that fast, no-nonsense way she'd started wearing since the day of the fire. She nodded to Elijah. Crane said Belgrave rides with bodyguards. 2 or 3, maybe more. Elijah signed quickly. They ride like they're guarding something heavy. That makes them predictable. Drummond watched his hands, squinting. I'm learning. But damn if your fingers ain't quicker than my brain. Lena smirked. He means they can be baited. Drummond frowned. You sure this ain't personal, Marshal? Elijah looked away. Lena stepped forward. It's always personal. That doesn't make it wrong. The ride to Dry Ridge took 3 hours. Belgrave was holed up at an estate house built on stolen land. Dirty contracts. Officially, it belonged to the county. Unofficially, it was his. They didn't ride in fast. They rode in plain. Lena wore trousers. Practical, with her coat pulled tight and a rifle across her back. Drummond had polished his badge. But the nerves under his jaw gave him away. Elijah rode like he always had, silent, straight-backed. With that impossible calm that made men hesitate, even when they shouldn't. They dismounted a 1/4 mile out. Lena stepped to the crest of the ridge and peered down. 3 riders, 2 near the stables, 1 by the door, all armed, all bored. Drummond muttered, "Always the bored ones who shoot first." Elijah pulled out a small sketch. He'd drawn the estate based on a single visit 5 years prior. It hadn't changed. 2 exits. 3 floors. Window on the north face left cracked in warmer months. And a cellar that, if not watched, could be. Used to sneak out. He passed the plan to Lena. She nodded. You want me to take the cellar? He didn't confirm. Just looked her in the eye. She drew a deep breath. Then nodded again. They moved. Drummond stayed at the tree line. Rifle ready. Elijah approached the gate from the front, leading his horse. He carried no rifle. Just the revolver on his hip and the marshal star visible against his coat. The guard. At the door noticed him late. Can I help you? He asked, voice stretched thin with suspicion. Elijah held up a slip of paper. On it, a warrant, signed by Deputy Marshal Crane and stamped by the regional judge. The guard barely had time to read before. Elijah clocked his movement. Right hand, holster. Elijah stepped forward before the man could draw. 1. Hit. Swift. Clean. A punch to the ribs and a twist of the wrist. The guard went down. By the time the other 2 guards realized what had happened, Lena had already slipped through the cellar and into the hallway beyond. Her footsteps were soft. Her rifle ready. Inside. The house was too quiet. Elijah stepped into the front hall, gun drawn. Belgrave. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The man appeared from the parlor, robe wrapped over fine clothes, a brandy glass in one hand. Marshal. Vance, I heard you'd resurrected. Elijah stared. Belgrave laughed. I suppose I should be nervous. But I imagine you're here on the basis of that silly ledger your preacher friend recovered. It's amusing. Lena stepped in from the hallway. Behind him, rifle aimed. I wouldn't laugh. Belgrave turned slowly. And you must be the wife. He said it like a slur. Lena cocked the rifle. Careful, Elijah signed. You came all this way for nothing, Belgrave said. That ledger means nothing without a court willing to act. And I own half the judges in this state. Drummond walked in then, dragging one of the guards by his collar. Not anymore. Belgrave didn't move, but his eyes flickered. You're going to jail, Drummond said. And we're going to make it stick. Belgrave looked at Elijah. Still won't speak? Afraid of what might come out. Elijah stepped forward, slow, measured, then handed him a piece of paper. It read, You were right, I went dark, but not to hide. To see what stayed lit when power turned its back. Turns out, it was people. And I serve them now. Belgrave tried to laugh again. But this time, no one listened. They rode him back to Sparrow Ridge in silence. When they arrived, the people were waiting. No pitchforks, no torches, just eyes. Watching. Lena dismounted first. Helped Drummond bring the man to the jail. Elijah stood by the horse, staring at the badge in his palm. He didn't pin it again. just closed his fingers around it. That night, back at home, Lena found him on the porch. She sat beside him. You did it. He looked at her, wrote slowly. We did, but it's not over. He has friends. Then we stay ready. He nodded. She leaned her head on his shoulder. They watched the stars blink open. One by one. And Sparrow Ridge slept. Not safe, not yet, but ready. The next morning, the earth smelled of iron and ash. Rain had fallen overnight, barely enough to soak the roots, but it left the air slick with weight. Not the weight of dread, but the kind of thickness that comes when something buried starts. Rising again. Lena stirred first. Her hair still tangled from sleep, her fingertips inked from the night before. She'd been writing until the oil lamp guttered out, chronicling the arrest, the ride home, the look on Elijah's face when the cuffs clicked shut around Belgrave's wrists. That small flicker of peace. Earned, not given. She slipped on her boots and stepped outside. The sky was the color of pewter, clouds stitched over the horizon like a seam pulled too tight. She saw Elijah near the edge of the pasture, leaning against the fence, his coat darkened with dew. He wasn't looking at the town. He was watching the trees beyond it. When she joined him, he didn't look away. Just reached into his pocket and handed her a folded note. Something's off. She read it twice, then nodded. She saw it too. Not in the way the animals were quiet, or the birds low in the sky, but in the tension of the air itself, the kind of quiet that didn't come from rest but retreat. Belgrave didn't act like a man caught, she said. Elijah pulled a second note from his coat, because he wasn't alone. She took it, studied his face. You think Jeb's still moving behind the curtain? He didn't answer. But he didn't need to. They returned to the house, packed quickly. Elijah checked the rifle, the saddlebag, the journal. Lena grabbed her scarf, her tin of ink, and a fresh pen. They weren't running. They were going to see Arden Row. Cedar Hollow looked different this time, not just because they rode in under low clouds, or because the road had been partially washed out by rain, but because this time they weren't seeking help. They were seeking truth. Row met them at the edge of the graveyard. He looked older, tired in a way that spoke of heavy knowledge. You came, he said simply. Elijah nodded. Lena stepped forward. We need names. And not just ones written in ledgers. We need the men who spoke to Belgrave in shadows, the ones still moving, still dangerous. Row didn't flinch. Come inside. His church was colder than she remembered, sparse, stone walls that held secrets better than sound. He led them to the back, where a locked cabinet stood beneath an old cross. Inside were boxes. Letters. Transcripts. Maps. He called it contingency, Rose said, pulling out a file marked with a wax seal, in case the law ever got brave. Lena opened. The folder. Inside was a single name, circled twice in black ink, Richard Vell. Who is he? She asked. The one who made Belgrave, Rowe replied. The one Jeb feared. A broker of men. Elijah took the paper. His eyes didn't leave it for a long time. They stayed in Cedar Hollow that night. Not in the church, but at a friend of Rose, a quiet widow named Agnes who lived near the edge of the wheat fields. She cooked beans and cornbread and made up 2 beds like it was routine. That night, Elijah took out the journal and wrote 3 pages. Then crossed out every word. Lena touched his arm. You don't have to carry it all. He passed her one line. I thought we'd finished the war. Turns out, we just won a battle. The next morning, before the sun even rose, they were gone again, heading east toward Richard Vell, toward the man who made monsters. They rode light. No papers, no extra clothing, just food, water, and truth. The road narrowed past Split Creek, where the land dipped into ravine and gully. Elijah knew the terrain. He'd patrolled it in another life. But now it felt different, older, more aware. They arrived at 3 Pines by dusk. The town wasn't a town, not really. A rail station, an old tavern, and a string of homes too tired to fall. They tied off their horses at the tavern and entered like ghosts. No. One looked up. That was the first sign. Lena touched Elijah's arm. He nodded. They took a table near the stove. The barkeep came slow, tired, dead-eyed. "You've seen him," Lena said. The barkeep looked down. "I'm not looking for trouble," he muttered. "Neither are we. Just the truth. He comes once a week, takes the back room. Talks to no one. Leaves with more than he came. When? Tomorrow. Morning, early," Elijah signed. Lena translated. "Can we see the room?" The man hesitated. Then nodded. They followed him down a narrow hallway, past 3 doors. He stopped at the last. "It's locked," he said. "Always is." Lena pulled a pin from her hair. Moments later, the lock clicked. Inside was not what they expected. Not a room. An office. Polished desk. Ledger books. Letters marked in crimson ink. Maps of towns, of railroads. Names of men underlined. Judges, lawmen, merchants, some crossed out. Some circled. Elijah picked up one letter. It read, "Caraway failed. Belgrave compromised. Clean the path. Send warnings. Make examples." Below that, initials. R.V. Lena looked up. "This isn't about power. This is about control." Elijah moved to the map. One town circled in red. Sparrow Ridge. A note scribbled beneath it, "Fall or be forgotten." Elijah stepped back. Everything in the room had shifted. This wasn't revenge. This was invasion. He wrote a note and handed it to Lena. Double quotes, "We go home. We warn them. And we prepare." She didn't ask how. She just nodded. They left the room untouched, locked it behind them, and rode through the night, back to the town that had given them a name, back to the town that was about to be tested, because the storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. The wind shifted before they saw the smoke. Sparrow Ridge had always been a town that smelled of cedar and earth. But now the air carried something sharper, the edge of charcoal, of old wood burning hot. Lena gripped the reins tighter as they crested the ridge, the horse beneath her restless with tension. Elijah slowed beside her. Below, the town stood, still intact, still breathing. But the smoke wasn't from the houses or the saloon. It rose behind the church. The wheat fields. Lena kicked her horse into a gallop. They hit the main street in minutes, hooves pounding against dry soil. People were gathered in knots, some holding buckets, others simply watching. At the center, Sheriff Drummond stood shirt-sleeved and soot-streaked, barking orders between coughs. When he saw them, he didn't smile. "They hit us before dawn," he said, breath ragged. "Fire in the fields. Didn't spread thanks to the rain, but it was no accident." Elijah dismounted. He didn't need to ask. Drummond handed him a scorched piece of paper. "This is your warning." Lena read it aloud. Her voice didn't tremble. "You were told to surrender. You were told to stop. You've made your choice. Now we make ours." Signed, our VTHE initials were enough. Elijah didn't even glance at Lena. He simply walked to the town center, climbed the steps of the church, and rang the bell. 3 times, the sound echoed through the valley. A call, not to worship, but to war. Within the hour, the people gathered. Men with tools, women with rifles, boys no older than 16 carrying water pails and resolved. Lena stepped forward, held up the note. "They want fear. They want surrender. We give them neither. This town is ours. This place is ours." She looked to Elijah. He pulled a note from his coat. "We build walls. We set watches. We prepare. No panic, only purpose." Drummond stepped beside them. "I'll deputize every able-bodied hand. We dig in tonight." No one objected. They got to work. By sunset, the fields were guarded. Barriers built from cartwood and barrels lined the roads, The schoolhouse became a triage center. And the church basement became the town's first true armory. Lena worked without rest. She cataloged weapons, distributed supplies, drew maps based on Elijah's old patrol routes. When her hands trembled from fatigue, she wrote through it. That night, the town didn't sleep. They waited. Elijah stood watch on the north end. Lena brought him a flask of water just before midnight. He didn't drink. Just nodded. She touched his hand. I'm scared. He didn't write an answer. Just looked at her, eyes soft. Then finally, pulled a small slip from his pocket. So am I, but we've been scared before. And we're still standing, she smiled. Not because she felt safer, but because they were together. At dawn, the scouts returned. 5 riders, coming from the east, dark coats, red sashes, guns drawn. Not an army. A message. Elijah stood in the center of the road, just outside the barricades. The riders slowed, one dismounted. He was young, too young for the violence in his eyes. You're Elijah Vance? Elijah nodded. The boy tossed a small pouch at his feet. Inside, ash black powder and a strip of torn cloth. That's from the town that didn't listen. Lena stepped beside Elijah. We're not them, the boy grinned. No, but you will be. By tomorrow. He turned to remount. Elijah raised a hand. The boy paused. Elijah stepped forward, handed him a note. The boy read it, lips moving, then scowled. He threw it down. You can't intimidate us with poetry. He rode away. When he was gone, Lena retrieved the paper. You mistake our quiet for fear. But silence is the breath before a strike. The town readied itself. That afternoon, Elijah and Lena walked the entire perimeter. Checked every post, every watch station. Reinforced the barricades. Stored rations. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. By nightfall, the clouds returned. But this time, no rain. Only thunder. Lena stood on the church steps, staring at the horizon. Lights flickered in the distance. Campfires. Dozens. Elijah stood behind her, hand resting gently on her shoulder. The townspeople gathered slowly. No cries, no panic. Just eyes. Watching. Waiting. They'll come before dawn, Drummond said quietly. That's what I do. Elijah nodded. Then turned to the people. He didn't raise his hands, didn't gesture grandly. He simply held up the badge. Then dropped it into the dirt. Lena watched it land, light catching the metal. Not in shame. In declaration. He wasn't the law. He was the line. She stepped forward. When they come, we hold. We don't just fight to survive. We fight to remember who we are. And for a moment, the town of Sparrow Ridge didn't feel small at all. It felt like the heart of the world, and the storm waiting outside. Its borders had no idea what it was walking into. Dawn didn't come gently. It cracked the sky like glass, red slashes across a horizon too dark for morning. Sparrow Ridge, armed and ready, didn't blink. Elijah was already at the barricade when the first sound hit. Not hoofbeats, but drums. Slow, intentional, not from soldiers, but from men who wanted to be feared. And the ground answered. Dust rose in the east like breath held too long. Lena stood beside him, rifle strapped, journal tucked into her satchel, a thin blade at her hip. Her hands didn't shake. Not today. Behind them, the town waited in silence. Mothers with kitchen knives, blacksmiths with hammers, children holding sling stones like ancient warriors. Not one of them born for war, but all of them ready. Elijah raised a single hand. The bell rang once. No speech, no orders, just the tolling. The signal. They came like shadows, men in long coats and red bands. 30, maybe more. Some rode, most walked. Their leader rode at the front, tall, with a trimmed beard and a revolver polished like silver. Richard Vell. He stopped 20 yards out, raised a hand. I gave you chances, he called. Warnings, offers. Lena stepped forward. You gave us threats. "And Ash," he smiled, "I came to claim what's mine." Elijah stepped beside her, raised the badge, then broke it in half, and threw it into the dust. Gasps rippled. Vel's smile cracked. "Then you've chosen your end." Elijah's revolver was out. Before the echo faded, the first shot wasn't his. It came from the bell tower. Sniper. Young Sarah Thorne. Her father's rifle. Her own aim. One of Vel's men dropped. Then the street erupted. Gunfire. Smoke. Screams. The clash of iron and fire. Sparrow Ridge held its line. The barricades buckled but didn't break. Hammers met blades. Rocks met skulls. And Elijah moved like a ghost in wind. He didn't fight with rage. He fought with purpose. Every shot counted. Every step meant something. He pulled Drummond from a falling beam, dragged a bleeding boy behind cover, took a bullet to the arm, and didn't even flinch. Lena stayed high. From the church's second floor, she fired until her bullets ran dry, then switched to the knife. When a raider burst through the back entrance, she drove the blade into his collarbone and shoved him down the stairs. Vel pushed through the smoke, aiming for the center. He wanted Elijah, and Elijah let him. They met at the square. No words, just two men shaped by different kinds of silence. Vel drew first, but Elijah didn't shoot. He threw his shoulder into him, tackled him to the ground, knocked the revolver from his grip. They fought like animals. Dirt and blood. No glory. Until Vel found a knife, drove it into Elijah's side. Elijah didn't fall. He grabbed Vel's wrist, wrenched the blade out, slammed it hilt first into Vel's temple. The man crumpled. Elijah stood, bleeding, barely. Lena was there in seconds. "You're hit." He passed her a note, bloodstained but legible. "We're all hit, just not down." Behind them, the last of the invaders fled. Drummond limped toward the square, face streaked with soot and resolve. "It's over," he said. Lena looked. Around. The church still stood. The schoolhouse too. Half the town was scorched, but it was theirs. Elijah finally sat. Not in pain. In peace. That night, Sparrow Ridge burned its dead and sang no hymns. They sat by the fires, told stories, marked names into fresh wood. They didn't speak of victory, only survival. Lena found Elijah in the barn, shirt off, wounds dressed. He held the journal, handed her the pen. She wrote, "This isn't how the story ends, it's how it begins." He nodded. Then pointed to her, signed, "Tell it, all of it. Let them know silence isn't surrender. That we built something louder than war." And so she did. Years later, they'd call it the Day of Ash. But for Lena and Elijah, it was the day the world heard them, not in words, but in what they chose to save. The sun rose slow and wide across Sparrow Ridge, its light catching the soot still dusted on rooftops, the ash still clinging to railings and boots. It was the first morning in memory without smoke in the air. But the quiet wasn't peace yet. It was aftermath. Lena moved through the town with sleeves rolled high, hands wrapped in linen. She had no time for ceremony, not today. There were wounds to tend, names to list, walls to rebuild. She jotted down who had fallen, who had stayed, who had run. Each name mattered. Each would be remembered. Elijah, his arm in a sling, stood near the rebuilt church bell, watching the sky. Not for threats, just to see the clouds drift without urgency. Drummond approached, not limping anymore, but slower than before, a cane in hand, eyes softer than ever. "We got letters," he said, "from Carson, from towns further out. News traveled faster than smoke. People want to come, help, join." Elijah raised a brow. Drummond smiled. "Turns out word of a silent man and his town standing up to Vel reached more ears than we thought." He handed over a packet, pages, names, requests to move to Sparrow Ridge, families, merchants, doctors. Elijah read, then passed it to Lena when she arrived. She blinked. "They want to live here? They want what you fought for, Drummond replied. They want to believe in something that held. She exhaled, slow, then turned to Elijah. Can we hold it again? He pulled a pencil from his coat and scribbled quickly on the back of one letter. Not just hold it. Build it. Stronger. By week's end, new hands arrived. Some in wagons, others on foot. No one was turned away. Sparrow Ridge opened its arms without fanfare, but with order. Elijah ensured that everyone got a job, a purpose. Whether you came with coins or calluses, the town doubled in size by winter. The wheat fields were replanted. The schoolhouse gained another floor. The church held services again, not just of worship, but of remembering. Stories were shared aloud, not as warnings, as truths. Lena wrote through every season. Volume after volume. Not just of the fight, but of the rebuilding, of small choices, of children born into a town that had already found its backbone. She started calling her books the Sparrow Testimonies. She never wrote under her name, just one letter. Elijah didn't speak still, not with words, but his voice was everywhere. In the patrol paths he mapped, the hand signals he taught, the training sessions he gave by lantern light. He had become more than a marshal. He was the memory of resistance and the proof of what happened when silence didn't mean submission. By spring, a new council had formed. Not officials, neighbors, bakers, tanners, the blacksmith's wife, the former saloon girl, and Lena. She sat with the others every fortnight under the new cedar roof of what had once been Vell's barracks. They called it the hall. Not for power, for planning. They discussed irrigation, fair prices, protection not just with guns, but with policies, codes, shields that didn't require a badge. One day, a boy from another town approached the hall with a letter. It was from a group of settlers further east, under threat. Same kind of riders, same red sashes. Same fear. The council read it. Lena stood. We send help, supplies, fighters if needed. Drummond, now half retired, nodded. You sure they want our kind of help? They asked. She said. That's enough. Elijah entered halfway through the meeting. Read the letter. Then added his own slip beneath it. We were alone once. We won't. Let others be. That week, Sparrow Ridge sent its first convoy, 3 wagons, 7 volunteers. A new kind of frontier justice. One that carried books and bullets side by side. And slowly, across the West, the legend shifted, not of outlaws, not of lone guns, but of a town, a place where a mail-order match led to a movement, where a woman fleeing a name found her own, where a man who spoke nothing taught people how to listen. One night, years after the siege, Lena sat at her desk, a candle low, Elijah asleep on the porch. She opened the latest letter from a girl in Iron Hollow. The girl asked if the story was true. If one man without words could start a fire that refused to go out. Lena smiled, then wrote, not a fire, a spark. The people were the blaze, and they still burn. Outside, wind swept through the grass. The bell rang once in the distance, not for warning. Not for war. Just because it could, because Sparrow Ridge still stood, and the silence had never been louder. The wind carried stories now. Not warnings, not threats, just stories, wagon trails that led to Sparrow Ridge came heavy with dust and hope. Travelers no longer asked if the town could protect them. They asked how they could help it grow. From the north came carpenters, from the east teachers, from the south 2 seamstresses who knew how to fire a rifle and sew a dress in the same hour. Lena kept a ledger now, not of debts or crimes, of changes, births, names, shifts in the soil, dates when the bell rang for joy. Not alarmed. Elijah read every entry, slowly, carefully. His silence had never been quieter, but it no longer needed to shout. He was known. He was trusted. His journal had become scripture to some. Not because it held Prophecy, but because it had documented clarity. Truth without flourish. Decisions without cruelty. One passage had begun to circulate beyond the town. Power is not in command. It is in service. And silence, used well, is a blade sharper than war. A newspaper from Carson City printed it. Then a town in Granger. Then a school book in Helena. One morning, a letter arrived, signed with initials only WRLI, and I read it aloud in the hall. Your resistance cost us dearly. You won't see more riders. But the war you think you ended has changed shape. We adapt. You won't like how, Drummond snorted. They're losing power. That's all this is. Noise. But Elijah didn't dismiss it. He copied the letter, kept it in his coat. Trouble didn't always come riding with banners. Sometimes it came in paperwork, in whispers, in men who smiled when they lied. So the council shifted focus. From defense to education. From building fences to growing alliances. Lena proposed a school for older children. Not just arithmetic or scripture. Strategy, communication, history without heroics. We don't raise fighters, she told them. We raise thinkers who know when to fight. Elijah wrote beside her note, and when not to. The council approved it unanimously. Construction began in spring. By midsummer, the foundation stood. Wide walls, open rafters. A bell tower of its own, not for fear. For calling minds together. One night, during the first storm in months, a rider arrived. Alone, drenched, thin, clothes torn. They pulled him into the saloon. Lena tended his wounds. Elijah watched from the door. The man's name was Callum Gray, former clerk, former courier. Now a refugee from a mining town called Pharaoh's End. They shut it down, he said. Not by fire, by finance. Wages cut, food priced up, protection gone. Anyone who spoke out vanished. Drummond frowned. And who did it? Can't say names. But they wore black vests, spoke of order. Used that phrase you used to hear in Vell's camp. Lena stiffened. Fall or be forgotten? He nodded. Elijah scribbled fast. They changed tactics. Not war, coercion. Gray handed them a torn page. Ledger markings, odd symbols, names replaced with numbers. It's a new code, he said. They're using it to hide the truth. That night, Lena and Elijah stayed up until the candle went low, decoding the symbols, cross-referencing with old ledgers. When the matches aligned, they saw it. 8 towns. Half shuttered. 3 in quiet rebellion. 1 stone bridge on the edge. They circled it on the map. By dawn, they had a plan. Not to fight. To teach. They would send emissaries. Not warriors, writers, builders. Listeners. The kind of people Vell's world couldn't understand. Couldn't. Stop. The hall approved the motion. 3 weeks later, Sparrow Ridge sent its first piece. Delegation. Lena chose the name. Elijah nodded. Approved. Added a line to the journal. Power cracks against patience. And the truest rebellion is education. In Stonebridge, they were met with skepticism. But not gunfire. The delegation brought stories, books, recipes, techniques, fair trade. By autumn, Stonebridge no longer bent to silent rule. The second letter arrived then, from a woman named Mireles, once a friend of Jeb. She had watched from the inside. Now she offered documents, names, ledgers. She asked only for safety. Lena replied with a carriage, a safe house, and her own letter. You are not forgiven. You are not condemned. You are valuable when you change. Elijah underlined the last line, because that, above all else, had become the rule of Sparrow Ridge. People could change. Not all did, but enough. Enough to shape something better, and in a world still reeling from ash and blood. That was more powerful than any badge. They rang the bell again that winter. Not for danger, but to mark a year since Vell fell, Children danced. Elders cried. And Elijah stood at the edge of town, watching the snow fall on roads that now led to safety. Lena joined him, held his hand. He passed her a note. Still quiet. Still standing. Still us. Spring returned to Sparrow Ridge with new color. The wildflowers came back early, covering hillsides that once held trenches and barricades. Children picked them without knowing what those ridges had held. That was the point. The war was over. But its echo lingered. Lena stood in the middle of the newly built garden behind the hall. The soil was dark and rich, a mix of ash and compost, growth made from what had once been ruin. She carried a worn notebook in her hand, her fingers smudged with both ink and dirt. Today she was not writing history. She was writing curriculum. Beside her sat Elijah, legs crossed, back against the garden wall. His eyes were closed, listening. Not to her, but to the sounds the town made now. Hammers that built, not defended. Laughter from the market. And somewhere, a fiddle tuning up for an evening dance. She spoke without looking. They want us to send a speaker to the Capitol. The new state council. To talk about what we did here. What it meant. Elijah opened one eye. She smiled. I said no. We send someone else. A teacher. A child. Someone they don't expect. He nodded. Then passed her a folded slip from his vest pocket. She opened it. Let the powerful speak of power. We speak of people. The town had changed. The hall now held shelves of books, trade maps, and a small printing press. The schoolhouse had 30 students. A bakery opened where the old jail once stood. The bell tower was rebuilt taller, not as a warning, but to be heard. There was even a theater now built from leftover wood and dreams. Every month, a new play. Some tragic, most hopeful, but even peace required vigilance. Late that spring, word came from a town called Denton Hollow. A town on no map, surrounded by fences and rules. Run by a man named Clay Wilkes. The same Clay once mentioned in Vell's old ledgers. He hadn't vanished. He'd just grown quiet. Elijah and Lena studied what little they had. Scattered notes, smuggled reports, frightened letters. It was a prison town. People went in. Didn't leave. Children raised in silence. Outsiders forbidden. Lena frowned. We could send another delegation. Elijah shook his head. Wrote, not a delegation, a witness. So they sent one person. Someone no one would expect. A traveling tinker named Theo Grims. Old, kind, with eyes like storm glass and a memory that held more than facts. He wrote in with buttons and needles and pots. He sent letters. Back every week. His 5th letter arrived with urgency. Lena read it. Aloud in the hall. They are not bound in chains but in words. Fear disguised as order. Children afraid to laugh. Women punished for dissent. They do not call it law, but correction. I have seen no joy here, only obedience. Drummond clenched his fist. We need to bring them out, all of them. But Lena hesitated. She looked at Elijah. He wrote, they must want to leave. We cannot rescue those who do not know freedom exists. So they built a plan. Not with rifles. With books. With stories. They created a mobile library, a wagon filled with stories of Sparrow Ridge, coded into tales of adventure and quiet defiance, hidden in children's books, folded between tales of foxes and sparrows. The wagon rolled into Denton Hollow, under the guise of trade. Theo delivered them, quietly, one at a time. Weeks passed. No response. Then, one day, a boy arrived at Sparrow Ridge's east gate, dust-covered, eyes wide. He handed Lena a drawing, a fox standing on a hill. Behind him, cages broken. And the word, soon. That night, the hall stayed lit until morning. Plans unfolded, names listed, routes mapped. They would not invade. They would open a door. Let them walk out on their own. Lena closed her notebook, rubbed her eyes. Elijah passed her tea. She took it, sipped, and whispered, They'll come when they believe they can. He nodded. Wrote, that's the work, not just surviving, making belief possible. Sparrow Ridge slept lightly those nights, not from fear, from readiness. They weren't just a town anymore. They were an idea, and ideas, once lit, don't go out easy, especially the kind born in fire and written in silence. The moon sat low over Sparrow Ridge, heavy and pale like it hadn't slept in days. In the quiet hours before dawn, a wagon creaked into town. No one rode inside. Only crates, sealed and bound in wire, stacked like secrets. Lena was already at the gate. Elijah stood behind her, coat drawn tight against the chill. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. The symbol on the side of the wagon, a fox beneath an open cage, told them everything. Theo had sent the signal. They moved fast. By sunrise, the crates had been opened. Inside, journals. Not blank ones, filled, names, ages, habits, memories. One for every child in Denton Hollow. Smuggled out in silence, each book held a life that had almost been erased. At the bottom of the final crate was a torn note. They're coming. Not as a flood, as footsteps, one after the other. Watch the horizon, and they did. The next night a girl arrived. 10, maybe 11. Shoes too big, eyes too alert. She didn't speak. Just handed over a folded cloth. On it, stitched in red, keep going. 2 nights later, 3 siblings, carrying only a tin of dried apples and a storybook with the corners chewed off. By the end of the week, 12 more. The people of Sparrow Ridge didn't ask where they came from. They gave them beds. Hot food. In silence, when needed. But change never travels alone. One evening, a man rode in. Clean coat, polished boots. No dust on his saddle, he claimed. To be an emissary. Said the Denton Hollow leadership was concerned. You're luring away children, he accused. Drummond met him on the porch of the hall. Lena beside him. Elijah by the bell tower. They're not lured, Lena said. They're walking. And we don't shut gates, the man scoffed. We'll send for law, Drummond laughed. We are the law. And we don't scare easy. The emissary left that night. But he took notes. Elijah watched from the ridge as the man rode east, his back stiff with threat. 3 days later, another rider came, but this one didn't come to threaten. She came to join. Tall, dark-skinned, quiet but sharp. Her name was Rhea Collings, and she carried a satchel full of documents, names, reports, things she'd stolen from the Denton Hollow files. I worked their numbers, she said. Watched who vanished. They called them reassignments. I called them ghosts. She handed Lena a thin book. You'll want to read this. It's their manual. How they erase people without leaving graves. Lena. Read every word. So did Elijah. When they finished, Elijah passed Lena a card. We opened the gate wider, and we warned the world. By week's end, Sparrow Ridge had couriers on the road. Not just to rescue, to inform. Articles, pamphlets, testimonies. They didn't name Denton Hollow directly, but they named the pattern, the silence, the way obedience was mistaken for peace. And people began to notice. Not all believed, but more asked questions. That was enough. Until at WASN single quotes T. Late one night, the bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. The town stirred. Elijah stood at the edge of the road, a shadow in the moonlight. Behind him, 20 children slept in the schoolhouse. Ahead of him, 7 riders, uniformed, armed, faces covered. They didn't speak, didn't dismount. They lit torches, held them, a warning. Drummond stepped beside Elijah. You come with threats, you best follow through, because we don't shake easy. The leader removed his mask. He was older than expected, worn eyes, a voice like sandpaper. You're making it hard to keep people quiet. That's dangerous. Lena appeared beside them. Her voice steady. Truth usually is. The man looked at the children in the distance. Send them back, or we come back different. Elijah pulled a single slip of paper. Held it out. The man took it, read it, then spat. He left. No one followed. When he was gone, Lena picked up the note. She read it. They ran from silence. We won't give them back to it. The torches hadn't burned anything, but the message had been sent. So Sparrow Ridge prepared. Quietly. Carefully. Not with guns. With light. They lit lanterns every night now, lined the paths, hung them in trees, made it clear. This was a place of visibility, of welcome. You didn't sneak into Sparrow Ridge, you were seen. And being seen meant you mattered, even if the world wanted you gone. That became the motto, whispered by new arrivals. They saw me, and I stayed. And so they came, one by one, until Sparrow Ridge grew large enough to need a new name, but they never took one, because names are easy to erase. But a story like this? It lingers, even in silence. The rains came in early summer. Not soft. Not gentle. They fell like apologies too late, soaking everything they touched. The new lumber stacked behind the schoolhouse, the half-built watchtower, the street still warm from yesterday's sun. Lena stood in the center of the square, soaked to her knees, reading the latest letter smuggled from Hollow. It was short. One sentence. We've stopped whispering. Are you listening? She folded it slowly, slid it into the inside pocket of her oilskin coat, and walked to the hall. Elijah was already there. Soaked, silent, UNMOVING. She dropped the coat on the hook by the door. It's time. He handed her a map, 6 towns circled in red. Hollow wasn't the center, it was the lever. The weight behind 100 quiet wrongs. They'd waited long enough. The council gathered that night. No ceremony. No chairs. Just a circle on the old church floor. Lena laid out the plan. This isn't a raid, not a march. We show up. We speak. We invite. And we protect whoever says yes. Rhea folded her arms. And if they shoot first? Lena looked at Elijah. He passed her a note. Then we shield. But we don't fire until they demand it. Drummond tapped his cane. That's a heavy bet. On mercy, Lena nodded. No heavier than the one we made when we opened our gates. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it passed. The next morning, 3 wagons rolled out from Sparrow Ridge, not with banners. With books, medicines, letters from children whose names had been written and stolen, journals. The convoy was slow, but every mile mattered. Along the way, more joined. Former townsfolk, healers, 2 priests, a blind cartographer who'd drawn a map. From memory of every place she'd been turned away. By the time they reached the outskirts of Hollow, they were a caravan. No weapons drawn. No shouts. Just lanterns lit. The guards at the gate didn't speak at first. Then one said, "You're not allowed." Lena stepped forward. "We're not asking." He lifted his rifle. She didn't flinch. Behind her, Elijah unrolled a sheet of paper, held it high, a drawing. The same fox, same hill, same cages open. One child behind the guard gasped. "I've seen that, in a book." The guard looked back. His hand didn't lower, but it didn't rise either. He stepped aside. They walked in. The Hollow wasn't a ruin. It was too clean, too still. Whitewashed walls, perfect fences. Everyone in place. Everyone afraid. Until the caravan stopped in the square. Rhea stood on a crate. Her voice didn't shout. It didn't need to. "You've been told your stories don't matter. That's a lie. Here's proof." They handed out books. Letters. Names. A girl whispered, "My brother wrote that. They said he was gone." A man cried. No one drew a gun. That night, the Hollow didn't sleep. And when morning came, 23 families stood at the gate. Ready. Not running, just walking. Behind them, no one followed. But no one stopped them either. The return to Sparrow Ridge was slow. The wagons heavier. But quieter. Elijah rode at the rear. watching, writing. When they arrived, the bell rang. Twice, not a warning, a welcome. They were met with soup, blankets, smiles. One boy asked Lena, "Are we free now?" She kneeled. "Freedom isn't a place, it's what you choose next. We'll help you choose." Later that week, a letter came, unsigned. UNSTAMPE. It read, "You're changing too much too fast. Stop, or we will." Drummond burned it without reading it out loud. Rhea didn't blink. "Let them come." Elijah passed Lena a note. "They won't. They're not afraid of us. They're afraid of what happens if we succeed." That summer, a new building rose in Sparrow Ridge, not a tower, a library. Carved into the stone above its door, truth is a kind of fire. It spreads, and in the center of its first room, Elijah's journal. Open to a blank page. Waiting. Because the story wasn't finished. Not yet. The winds that swept Sparrow Ridge in the late summer weren't violent. They were warm, constant, and oddly comforting, like the town itself. They carried both memory and motion. Elijah stood at the edge of the hill behind the new library. From there, you could see the whole town, the rebuilt watchtower, the sprawl of homes that had nearly doubled, the schoolhouse courtyard where children were learning their third language. And above it all, the bell tower, its chime now signaling moments, not emergencies. Lena joined him, hands in her pockets, the last of the golden sunlight catching in her braid. "We got a letter today," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "From East Granger. They've built a Ridge-style council. Asked if we'd send someone to guide it." He passed her a note. "Send someone new. Let them lead the way they need, not the way we did." That was the lesson, wasn't it? Sparrow Ridge had never meant to become a symbol, but it had. Not because it raised arms. Because it raised voices, held lines, offered sanctuary without shouting. In the hall that evening, the council gathered. Again, it looked different now, a mix of old faces and new. Children who had once arrived afraid now speaking up in two languages. Rhea presided tonight, her voice calm and fierce. "We've received word from 5 towns asking for stories, not laws. Not defense, just guidance." Drummond, still leaning on his cane, now mostly ceremonial, nodded. "Then we give them stories." Lena pulled a journal from her satchel. Not one of Elijah's, one she had started. Sparrow lines. A collection of letters, anecdotes, sketches, even songs. She passed it around. "Let this be the seed, not a gospel. A garden starter." And so began the Ridge letters. Small pamphlets printed weekly and distributed by wagon. Stories of choices made, errors owned, help offered. They carried no signature. Only a mark, a simple inked sparrow, wings half open. The children began to draw it on school walls. The towns began to echo it. But with growth came new questions. What happens when the idea becomes bigger than the place? What happens when others claim your story? It started subtly. An orator in Haverford gave a speech about the Great Sparrow Doctrine, twisting peaceful principles into justifications for harsh law. Then, a settler claimed to represent the Ridge, enforcing taxes on a town in Sparrow's name. Lena read the report aloud to Elijah. His note came back quick. "Stories can be stolen, values cannot. Let the truth walk louder." They decided on an open forum. Not here, in Haverford, not a challenge, a correction, a delegation left within days. Elijah stayed behind. His presence was more powerful in absence now. Lena went. So did Rhea, and 3 young people who had once arrived in Sparrow Ridge, afraid to speak. In Haverford Square, the stage was already set, banners waved. False words echoed. And then Lena stepped up. She said nothing for a long time, just unrolled a scroll. It contained Elijah's words, in his original hand. Journal pages, moments, sentences that had built bridges and held back fire. Then she read, "We do not lead by demand. We lead by example. And if our name is used to hurt, it is not our name at all. A hush fell. The crowd shifted. Some left, but many stayed. One girl, no older than 12, raised her hand. Can we start again? Lena smiled. You just did. Back in Sparrow Ridge, Elijah watched the sky shift, the clouds thinning into the kind of light that touches everything without needing to ask. New stories were arriving now. Not about Sparrow Ridge, but from places inspired by it. The council began compiling them. A new library wing opened. Echoes. Every week, someone read a new echo aloud. One evening, as the stars blinked in soft, Elijah placed a fresh blank journal on the front step of the hall. He tied a pencil to it with string. Above it, a sign. Tell us what you see. The next morning, a child had written, I saw someone fall, and someone helped them. That's what Sparrow Ridge means. Below it, someone else added, I saw myself, and I wasn't afraid. Then another, I saw the truth, and it didn't yell. It just stood there. By evening, 20 pages were filled. By week's end, 2 new journals were needed, because Sparrow Ridge wasn't a story anymore. It was a mirror, and people finally were learning to look. The first frost of winter crept into Sparrow Ridge on a silent wind, thin and silver. It clung to windows and kissed the ground like a memory returning home. People rose early that morning, not to scrape or sweep it away, but to admire it. Another page turning, another season arriving gently instead of with violence. Elijah was already awake, watching the frost gather along the edge of the rooftop from the library's second window. He didn't write. He hadn't, not for weeks. His last note had said it all. The story belongs to those still becoming. And now, the town was full of those becoming. Lena emerged from the hall before the sun broke the ridge, a letter clutched in her gloved hand. It came from Hollow, but it wasn't about need or warning. It was an invitation. A gathering. They were holding their own summit, following Sparrow Ridge's example. They called it Asterisk, the listening. Elijah met her at the base of the bell tower. She showed him the letter. He read it twice, then passed her a folded slip tucked into his sleeve. What begins in silence must continue in listening. She nodded. In the weeks that followed, preparations resumed. Not just for departure, but for inheritance. Sparrow Ridge would not go dark while they were away. Children were now old enough to oversee the bakery. New settlers had taken charge of the stables. Rhea organized communication routes with other Ridge-inspired towns. Before they left, Elijah placed his journal, the original one, in a sealed glass case inside the library's front wall. Not behind glass to preserve it. Behind glass to pass it on. He left a note taped to the case. Don't read to follow. Read to remember, and write to begin. The road to Hollow felt lighter this time. It wasn't escape. It wasn't defense. It was echo. And when they arrived, they were greeted with a mural painted on the side of the repurposed watchtower. A sparrow, wings tilted back, not fleeing. Guiding. Below it, children had drawn stars. Inside, people stood in a wide circle. No stage, no lectern. Fire burned in the center. One woman stepped forward and said, simply, we came because someone told the truth and didn't demand to be heard. Elijah and Lena didn't speak that first night. They listened. And in that listening, they heard more than voices. They heard a world shifting. Stories were not being carried here. They were growing. The next morning, a boy approached them. 8, maybe 9. He held out a small wooden figure. For your library, he said. It's not a sparrow, it's a bridge. My father says every bird needs a place to land. Elijah held the carving in his palm for a long time before passing it to Lena. She nodded. Then we build more places to land. That evening, back in their borrowed cabin, Lena added one final page to her second journal. The world changed quietly. Not with fire, not with thunder, but with a series of doors left open. She placed the journal on the windowsill. The frost touched. It marked it. but did not erase it. In the morning, another hand picked it up. Read. And began to write. The frost never fully melted that winter. It stayed tucked in the corners of windows, brushed along the roots of trees, a silent witness to the next chapter of Sparrow Ridge. Even the sun seemed to tread more gently. Back in town, things didn't stop, they shifted. With Elijah and Lena still in hollow for the listening, Sparrow Ridge moved with its own rhythm. Rhea ran the council sessions now. She spoke less than Lena but carried the same weight. When she paused, people listened harder. Her focus turned toward something new. Children from other towns, sent by families who had no safety, no schools, no voice. Sparrow Ridge became not just a haven, it became a beginning. By late January, 5 new children arrived. One didn't speak. One never stopped. Another had eyes that saw everything and trusted nothing. But they were folded in, gently. Meals were shared, jobs offered. Stories told at dusk by the hearth in the library's east wing. One evening, as the wind curled low across the rooftops, Drummond stood before the fire with 3 of the new arrivals huddled near his knees. He told them how the bell tower used to fall silent during storms, how Elijah once rang it with a boot because his hands were full of bread. The children laughed. And somewhere across the square, the old bell chimed once. Not from wind. From memory. Elijah returned in early February. Not with ceremony. With a quiet nod. He walked through town like someone revisiting a dream they'd once drawn, only to find it real and thriving. He stopped at the bakery, at the tailor's, at the old stable that now held books and boots in equal measure. He saw people he didn't recognize, helping others he did. Then he entered the library. A child sat on the floor, reading from a fresh journal, her finger traced each line slowly. She looked up, saw him. "You're the quiet man," she said. He smiled. Nodded. And sat beside her. They read together until the candles burned low. That night, Lena returned too, her hair dusted with snow, her eyes carrying stories. She had spoken at the listening. Briefly. Powerfully. She had said, "We aren't finished. We're just rooted, and roots let others grow." They brought back letters, dozens, requests to visit, to learn, to listen. Sparrow Ridge opened its doors wider. Instead of one summit a year, they now held seasonal gatherings, small, intimate, story-driven. People didn't come to be led. They came to contribute. By spring, a new structure began rising beside the theater. A circle, open air with tiered seats of stone and pine. They called it the listening ring. It had no podium, only benches. And the center fire pit. Children practiced reading there. Elders sang there. Travelers stopped and shared tales for a meal. On the first day of May, a woman arrived with a child in her arms and said, "I was told this is where my daughter might learn how to speak with the world, not just at it." Lena took the child, held her. Then turned to the woman. "Here," she said. "The world listens back." Elijah carved a small plaque and nailed it to the entrance of the listening ring. Stories are how we survive. Listening is how we live. Later that year, a boy who once feared his own voice stood in that ring and sang. The town paused, not because it was perfect, because it was true. And somewhere, far from Sparrow Ridge, another child opened a journal, touched the ink of a stranger's words, and whispered, "Maybe this is for me too." And it was. By the time the first thunderclouds of summer gathered over Sparrow Ridge, the town was no longer a hidden place. It was a known one, spoken about in quiet taverns and loud courtrooms, whispered between tradesmen, sketched into the corners of letters and poems that never named it outright. Still, it remained itself. On the morning of the summer solstice, a letter arrived. It was heavy in ink and light in tone, written in a child's unsteady hand. "Dear Sparrow Ridge, my mom says you're not real, but if you are, we need help. Please write back." It was signed simply, "Jonas, age 7. The address was nothing more than a crossroads name. But Lena traced it to a coal town called Fenwick Hollow, far east. Barely on the maps, she handed the letter to Elijah. He read it once, then passed back a note. If they can write, they already believe. That's enough to start, so Sparrow Ridge sent a reply. But not just a letter. They sent a wagon, a quiet one, drawn by 2 mules and driven by a man named Clay, once a resident of Hollow, now a carrier of books, stories, and seed packets. Inside the wagon, supplies, journals, a small folding stage, and a copper lantern with the sparrow symbol etched into its side. When Clay reached Fenwick Hollow, the streets were bare. The people closed doors not out of hostility, but habit. He lit the lantern and waited. By dusk, a boy emerged. Tooth missing, shoes too tight, eyes bright. Are you from the book place? Clay nodded. The boy ran, returned 10 minutes later with 5 others. By nightfall, the wagon was surrounded. He read aloud from the journals. Played games with the seeds. Guess what this grows? Told stories that weren't his, but now belonged to everyone who heard them. A woman stepped forward. Is this church? Clay shook his head. It's a mirror. It just shows you what you already carry. He stayed 2 days. Left behind a wooden box of books, a crate of dried goods, and a promise. Asterisk, asterisk. There's a place where you're already understood. Come if you want. No one will stop you. But we won't beg you either. Back in Sparrow Ridge, Rhea read Clay's report aloud to the council. Drummond chuckled. We sent 1 man and gave them 10 reasons to hope. That's a good trade, Lena smiled. Let's send more wagons, not to save, to remind. And so the Sparrow Lanterns were born. Each wagon carried a copper lantern, a set of storybooks, tools, and a message. We are not the beginning. You are. We are only the spark. By end of summer, 12 towns had been visited. 3 sent visitors back. 1 sent a carved table. On it, 20 names of people who had found voice through the stories. That fall, Sparrow Ridge created a new space. The map hall. Not for geography. For journeys. Each town visited by the Sparrow Lanterns was marked not by a dot, but a thread woven from cloth, string, or hair. Each thread was paired with a story, pinned to the wall beneath the town's name. Children came to trace the lines with their fingers. Where did we help? One asked. Elijah passed him a note. Where did we remind? That's the better question. At the year's end, Lena received a package, wrapped in newsprint. Inside, a bundle of letters, all addressed to the story place. 1 caught her eye. Dear people who listen, I don't know how to say what happened, but I heard someone say truth doesn't need to be loud. So here it is, small and honest. I am still here. Thank you. There was no return address. She placed it on the wall. Below it, she wrote, that is enough. And Sparrow Ridge, without ever planning to, became not a place to arrive, but a place to return from, because the world finally was learning to carry the story forward, and when people forgot how, the lanterns would remind them. Quietly, honestly, completely. Winter came early that year. Not the kind that buries everything in white and silence, but the kind that slips in through the cracks in doors, in habits, in people. Sparrow Ridge lit its lanterns earlier each night, not out of fear, but out of promise. Promise that someone might still be walking. Promise that somewhere someone was reading. Promise that the story was still being written. In the heart of the library, beneath the soft echo of whispered lessons and the turning of pages. Rhea traced a new letter onto the central chalkboard. How do we teach a world that keeps forgetting how to listen? It wasn't rhetorical. It was the opening question of a gathering she had planned. The first quiet Congress. No speeches. No panels, just circles. Circles of people, gathered around lanterns, telling truths that didn't need applause. They came. In waves, from coasts, from hollows, from valleys that hadn't had names before the Ridge Lanterns reached them. Every room in Sparrow Ridge filled. And when those ran out, tents bloomed in the fields like patient flowers. One man, grizzled and scarred, stood in a circle of farmers and said, "I thought silence meant strength. But maybe it was just fear wearing a medal." A teenager followed. "They always said I talked too much. But maybe I was just trying to be heard before the world decided I didn't count." Each night, new circles. Each day, new questions written on the chalkboard. Elijah never spoke. But every morning, a fresh slip appeared on the reading table. Not answers, not doctrine. Just prompts. Who taught you the difference between quiet and dismissed? What do you carry that no one sees? What story do you want told when you're not in the room? On the final night, a child's voice rose in a lull. "My name is Sky. I used to think no one could hear me. But now I think maybe I just didn't have the right room. This is the right room." That night, they lit every lantern, even the old ones that hadn't burned in years. The ridge shimmered with soft fire. And from the surrounding woods and roads, people saw. Some approached, some didn't. But they all noticed Sparrow Ridge wasn't loud. It was luminous. The following morning, as the Congress disbanded, people left. Behind pages, letters, bits of story carved into stone or sketched into cloth. They weren't asked to. They just did. Rhea sorted them into a new archive. The listening leaves, each one read. None edited. Truth wasn't polished here. It was honored. Lena stood by the map wall later that day, watching a young girl weave thread. From her hometown to the ridge. "What does the color mean?" Lena asked. "Nothing," the girl said. "I just liked it." Lena smiled. "That's enough." In the months that followed, the lantern wagons traveled slower, not because they were fewer, because they lingered longer. Some towns requested more than stories. They requested tools, blueprints, ideas. So Sparrow Ridge began to share not just what they believed, but what they built. Circular forums, rotating council seats, shared libraries. Everywhere the wagons went, they left behind more than paper. They left behind structures. The quiet began to take shape. One morning, a bird landed on the bell tower, a real sparrow, first one, then 3. Then 12. No one said it aloud, but they all noticed. Elijah stood by the library door, watching. Held no note. No paper. Just the softest smile. That evening, Lena wrote in her third journal, "We lit lanterns, not because we feared the dark, but because we believed someone else might need to see their path." That page stayed open for days. Until someone added, in a different hand, "I did. Thank you." Spring in Sparrow Ridge no longer felt like a season. It felt like a rhythm. The town didn't wake up. It continued. The wind carried notes from a violin someone had tuned on the roof of the old mill. Children's laughter curled around the alleys. Chasing chalk drawings and stories whispered into tin cans strung on wire. In the library, a new wall was being framed, not for books, but for beginnings. A sign above it read, "Start something." People pinned things without asking permission. Questions, sketches, fragments of stories. A shoe sole from a journey that changed someone. A braid of rivergrass with no label. Next to it, a note in Elijah's handwriting. Proof doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be left behind. One morning, Lena found a girl outside the library door. No shoes, no name, just a folded page in her hand. Lena sat beside her. "I don't know if I belong anywhere," the girl said. Lena took the paper, unfolded it. Inside, one sentence. "I made it this far." Lena nodded. That's always enough. By that afternoon, the girl had joined the chalk circle outside the bakery. She didn't speak yet, but she drew. Stars, trees, an open hand. No one asked her what it meant. They just added around it. Rhea launched a new tradition that season. The night walks. Once a week. No lanterns were lit. People simply walked together in silence. Through the orchard, along the ridge, past the school and the field of stories. Some held hands, some walked alone. All listened. One night, a boy asked Elijah, "What are we listening for?" Elijah passed him a slip of paper, the space where someone might speak. That was enough. By midsummer, towns no longer waited for the wagons. They sent their own to visit, to bring stories back, to trade music, questions, and drawings from children they didn't know. One wagon brought honey. Another, a letter addressed to the quiet ones who made us loud. Another, just a bell. No note. But everyone knew what it meant. The bell now hangs above the listening ring. It has never rung an alarm. Only in welcome. And on the first evening of the solstice, it rang 13 times. No one planned it, but everyone knew why. 13 new people had arrived that week. Each one carrying something heavy. Each one leaving something behind. Lena watched them settle in, not into houses, into conversations. Into silence, into story. And one evening, as the wind picked up and a faint smell of cedar drifted through the square, she sat on the edge of the well and began to write. There was a time we thought survival was enough, that if we could just live, it would be enough. But Sparrow Ridge taught us that being known is what truly saves us. When she finished, she left the journal open. The next morning, someone had added, "I came here looking for a place. I found people instead. I'm not lost anymore."